الذين آمنوا وتطمئن قلوبهم بذكر الله ألا بذكر الله تطمئن القلوب.
Assalamu alaikum. How are you? So today we are going to discuss freedom and human rights, right? I've put some of these things when you go online and you search the internet, right? So the things that pop up when you particularly when you search Islam and human rights or Islam and freedom and all those kinds of things, this is what comes up is topmost on the internet, right? So what we see on the internet is this, like they're saying that Islam was spread by the sword. So others are saying that Muslims are forcing Islam on others. Others are saying that there are limitations on religious freedoms in Islam. Others are saying that liberalism and Islam are at odds with each other. Freedom versus Islam is that they're two different things, or they're blaming Islam for freedom deficit, what they call freedom deficit in the Middle East. They are also saying that Islam is the enemy of freedom, right? So Islam violates the First Amendment. Islam is responsible for everything that's happening around human rights violation. Islam forbids reasoning and freedom of choice, right? There's no freedom of thought, of expression in Islam, and then Islam versus freedom and liberty versus Islam. But this is total misconception. There's something behind this total ignorance, which we are going to discuss today. But this conception that human rights is something new, right? So what do you think about that?
It's not new.
So what do you know about it not being new?
Because Islam had human rights 1400 years ago in the Quran. The Quran had human rights 1400 years ago.
Yeah.
And only 148 years ago, the British Parliament gave women rights to inheritance, even though the Quran had it 1400 years ago.
That's one example. And then the UN came up with this
Declaration of Rights.
Declaration of Human Rights. When was that?
1948.
1948, and then it came up with two other covenants in around 1966. People are thinking that the UN came up with this Charter of Human Rights in 1948, but even before that, there were other written laws, and they talked about rights. So what do you remember out of those laws, like such as?
Babylonian.
Yeah, there's a Babylonian. What was that called?
Hammu-rabi.
Hammu-rabi. Yeah, so there was Babylonian Code of Hammu-rabi. So how many laws were there? There were 282. There were 282 laws, but those laws were
Graded.
Graded means
different for like master, slave, free people.
So those laws were not equally applied to all human beings, right? So there was different laws for slaves, and then different laws for the free men and women, right? Then there was those analectics of Confucius, right? So there were three principles. But then when those human rights specialists, when they analyze those analectics of Confucius, right, they find some problems with that, and we're going to provide links to that in the video. But the thing is that all this misconception about Islam is the enemy of freedom, and Islam doesn't provide freedom of choice. This is total ignorance. So one, like the myth that human rights is something new, that's wrong, right? And number two, that all those written laws did exist, right? But those written laws had some flaws, right? So when translated into policies, those written laws could not provide equal rights for all human beings, right? So behind all this ignorance, I would say, is the framework for freedom and human rights in Islam. So we're going to discuss that. But before we discuss that, I want to just point out that there are some flaws with the UN Declaration of Human Rights, right? And those flaws are not there with the fundamental framework of the Quran and Islam about the freedom and human rights. So those flaws are like these. The Declaration of Human Rights is just comprised of principles, key principles, and there's no way how they're going to be applied in different situations. For instance, freedom of expression. So what does that mean?
You can say whatever you want.
And whenever you want, right? And wherever you want. But is that the reality? Can we do that? No. So we cannot. But the Charter of the Declaration of Human Rights, that's silent about how these principles are going to be translated and applied in different situations. And then, like the Charter is out since 1948, right? Do you think there are equal human rights everywhere in the world? So there are human rights abuse in the third world. There's human rights abuse in the first and advanced world, despite having the Declaration of Human Rights. And then the third element is that there is no incentive. If you respect human rights of your fellow human beings at the individual level, right? So United Nations is not going to come and reward you and give you a plaque or something, right? And lastly, application of the Charter of Human Rights or the principles require a comprehensive system of government and courts and laws and whatever to apply those principles, which has not been possible until today, and which is not possible in the future as well. So let's unveil what's behind this systematic, I would call it a very systematic and organized propaganda of distortions and myths and misconceptions about Islam and the human rights. So when we remove these misconceptions, what we find out, first of all, is that the four key areas which Islam or the Quran has identified in terms of the fundamental freedoms and rights. One is the right to protection. The other one is religious freedoms and rights, economic freedoms and rights, and then the social equality. So we are going to discuss each of these quickly so that those who don't know about Islam and who just get this propaganda from Uncle Google, they at least have an idea what does Islam present and what's the value of that and the shortcomings that we discussed, the flaws that we discussed with the application of the Declaration of Human Rights or other documents that human beings had in the history. Those flaws don't apply to this particular principle. So within each of these areas, within the religious freedom rights, there are four other sub areas. Within the protection, there are two sub areas. Within social equality, there are two other areas, and within the economic freedoms, there are two areas. So these subdomains, like for instance, for religious freedoms and rights, there's freedom of belief. So what does the Quran say about the freedom of belief? Yeah, so what does it say? So what does it mean?
Whoever wants, they can believe, and whoever wants, they can disbelieve.
It says the truth is from your Lord, right? So whomever wants to believe, let them believe, and those who don't want to believe, let them not believe. So there is no, like the myth that we saw up there, that Muslims are out there to dominate the world and impose Islam on everyone. What we see in Islam, actually, in reality, is that Islam is just a way of life. So no Muslims is entitled to enforce or impose or compel anyone to Islam. So Allah says that leave them. فَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ. It's up to the individual. So this choice to believe is probably the only choice that we human beings have. Like, we have not given any choice, right? That you want to be a boy or a girl, right? And we don't have any choice that you want to be black or white or yellow or green or whatever, right? So the only choice that we have been given is to believe whichever way of life we want to believe. So then the next one is freedom from coercion, right? Like freedom from coercion means, and this is in the context of religious freedoms. What does the Quran say about it? In simple words?
Like
Rafiddin, right? That there is
no compulsion in religion.
There is no compulsion in religion. And this verse, this is chapter 10, verse 39. وَلَوْ شَاءَ رَبُّكَ لِآمَنَ مَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ كُلُّهُمْ جَمِيعًا. What does it mean?
And if your Lord wanted to make everyone believe,
yeah, he would have
كُلُّهُمْ جَمِيعًا. He would have made all of them
Muslims, right? But he didn't do that. So if he didn't do it, who are we to be striving to have global domination and impose and compel everyone to Islam? There is no place for that in Islam. So those who are saying that Islam is a political ideology and Muslims wants to dominate the world and force everyone to to be Muslims, that has absolutely no place in Islam, right? So Islam actually is a way of life, and Muslims have to be role models for others and create those conditions so that those who want to believe can freely believe and enjoy their religious freedom to believe, right? All right, so, and then freedom to worship. What does the Quran say about that? فَأْبُدُوا مَا شِئْتُم, right? فَأْبُدُوا مَا شِئْتُم مِّن دُونِهِ. So what does it mean?
Worship anyone besides him.
فَأْبُدُوا مَا شِئْتُم مِّن دُونِهِ. Yeah, so believe anyone you like besides him means Allah, right? So on the one hand, we have been told that this is your choice, but then with every time the Quran says that this is up to you, we have been warned that although you're making that choice, but if you make the wrong choice, then you're going to face the consequences. So he shows the benefits and the consequences, but gives that choice to human beings. So if the Creator is giving that choice to human beings, we don't have any authority to deny people those basic freedoms and go and impose Islam on others. And then the last one, under the religious protection of freedom, is the freedom to lawful action. And there we had فَأْبُدُوا مَا شِئْتُم, and here we have وَأْمَلُوا مَا شِئْتُم. So do whatever you like. If you want to do good or if you want to do bad, do whatever you like. You have the choice. But then you have to be accountable for your deeds. So these are the four key areas under the religious freedom. And then under the protection, the right to protection, the first of all is the basic human right to life and liberty, right? So what do we have for the protection of life? What's the incentive there?
If you kill one soul, it's like you killed all mankind.
Yeah.
And if you save one soul, it's like you saved all of humanity.
Exactly. So if you kill one human being, it means like as if you have killed all the humanity. And then for freedom from disrespect, actually Allah has broken it down to the very, very individual and personal level. Allah says that, and do not turn your cheek toward people and do not walk through the earth exultantly. Which means that you don't have to look down upon others, right? But the good thing is, you tell me that why has this protection from disrespect and abuse has been broken down to the very individual level, that don't treat people like this. So how is this related to something bigger than the individual level?
Because if you don't disrespect or hurt or kill or take away the rights of one person, then you won't do this, like you won't multiply it to a lot of people.
In simple words, if you don't commit a crime against one person, you won't commit crimes against the humanity, right? And all those things that we are seeing, the genocides and occupations and oppressions, those are crimes against humanity. So if you are so careful that you don't disrespect or don't hurt one individual, how could you imagine killing people in mass, right? All right, so let's quickly move to the way Quran and Islam guarantees social equality. What does the Quran say about slavery and other things?
It is not for a human prophet that Allah should give him the scripture and authority and prophethood, and then he would say to the people, be servants to me rather than Allah. Again,
just like here, it's saying that if you kill one human being, it's like killing all human beings. Like here, it's broken down to a very personal level to avoid things at the bigger level. Here, the way Allah or the Quran explains it is that it is actually telling us that even the prophet, which is the noblest of the human beings, even the prophets don't have the authority to tell others to be subservient to them, right? So if people are not supposed to be subservient even to the prophets, right? So who is better than them, right? So which means that there's no place for servitude in Islam. And if you go into the history, and I've given all these other references, right, that we'll post it online, then Islam has consistently and systematically worked to emancipate people from slavery, right? It has not condoned it. It has not permitted it. And it is throughout history, the effort has been to eliminate slavery, right? So there is no place for one human being to be subservient to another human being. And then freedom from deprivation. Again, this has been broken down to the very personal level. So what does it say?
O my people, give full measure and weight in justice, and do not deprive people of their due.
Yeah, so this has been repeated many times in the Quran, right? That give everyone his due. So this is again kind of a barrier to bigger exploitation. So if I'm so careful in my interpersonal relationships of trying not to abuse your rights and deprive you of your right, then in the bigger scheme of things at the community level or at the international level, I'll be even more mindful, right? So that's why, again, nipping evil in the bud. The last one is the economic rights and freedom, and that's kind of related. And do not consume one another's wealth unjustly. So again, starting at the very personal level. And last one is the freedom from unfairness. Whenever you have to make a decision between people, make just and right decisions, right? It's not just this framework. This whole framework is supported by the mechanism of reward and punishment. So in the Charter of Human Rights, right, or even at the national level, if you have a Charter of Rights, then you have to court and you have to have a lawyer, and then you have to go through a process to ensure that you get if your rights are abused, right? But then not everyone is able to go to the court or go through the court process and all those kinds of things. But here, what the Quran has done is actually the reason it's been broken down at the very personal level. Then there is a reward and punishment system attached to that, right? And that gives human beings some motivation at the very personal level to be cognizant of the human rights of other people that he or she interact with, right? And not to abuse their rights and their freedoms. Because of that reward and punishment system, irrespective of what's in the society, irrespective of the trends in the society, irrespective of the conformity in the society, irrespective of the laws of the state, if, for instance, you are an employee, a government employee, right, and you have to follow certain laws and treat people in a particular way, right? So you're obliged to do that. But if you see that there is something unjust and unfair, right, and you're a true believer, right, so what would you do then?
Follow this framework and do everything with justice and fairness.
So even if the law doesn't allow that, still you'll try your best not to be unfair and not to be unjust. For instance, if there's no law in the land, if there's no one to hold you accountable, you are still respectful of the rights of others and the freedoms of others because you feel yourself accountable, right? To whom?
To Allah.
To Allah, right? So that's why, regardless of whether there's a court, regardless of whether there's a law enforcement system, you feel accountable and you respect the rights of your fellow human beings. Another way around, you are in a society where there are certain norms which abuse a certain group of people. If that's unjust, unfair, there's a trend in the society, there's conformity in the society, there's peer pressure in the society. But if you are a true believer, right, you don't feel yourself accountable to your employer, you don't feel yourself accountable to the society, you feel yourself accountable to your Lord, regardless of what happens in the society, even if that's unjust. In your personal life, you make effort as much as you can to not abuse anyone's right and not to be unjust and unfair, right? A quick example is a person, what's his name? Oskar Schindler. Do you know him?
Someone who saved the Jews?
Yeah, Oskar Schindler was actually a member of the Nazi party, right? And technically, if you're a member of the party, then you're expected to follow the rules and laws and whatever of that particular party. But despite being a member of the Nazi party, what he chose to do was to save the victims of the Nazi oppression, right? And he did that very well. He chose whatever was right, whatever was just, and whatever was fair. So that's the reward and incentive system attached to implementation of this framework. And because of that, this is way more powerful and way more effective than any charter of human rights. And hopefully this clears the misconception for those who believe that in Islam there is no place for freedom and human rights, or Islam doesn't provide freedom for belief, or Islam compels and imposes Islam on others. So on the one hand, all those misconceptions should go away. People have to study and read the Quran and understand everything for themselves, rather than going to Uncle Google and pulling all those all that propaganda about Islam and Muslims. So besides that system of reward and punishment, what Allah has done is that He has made it very, very clear to us that you are respecting others' rights not for them, but for your own self. If you're doing good, that's for your own sake, right? If you're respecting others' rights, that's for your own sake. If you're not depriving others of their property and wealth and all those kinds of things, that's for your own benefit, right? Not for the benefits of others. So you don't feel like you're doing favor to others by respecting their own rights, right? You're actually helping your own self, right? So on the one hand, you have the reward and punishment attached to this framework. On the other hand, you have this huge sense of responsibility that with doing good, you're actually doing good to yourself, not to the humanity alone. And lastly, I just still can't comprehend that anyone who would be a true believer in the Quran and its laws, that he would know and believe in all this and still go ahead and abuse others' rights or treat them unfairly and unjustly. It's just not possible. All right, so I think with this we are good. So you're still young. If you go through Uncle Google and you find such propaganda and ignorance about Islam and Muslims and human rights and freedoms, at least you'll have a good understanding of what's the truth and what's falsehood, right? Are we good? All right.
بذكر الله ألا بذكر الله تطمئن القلوب